At my cousin's wedding, my chair had no name tag, no plate, and no seat at the family table. When I asked, my mom said loudly, "You're lucky we even let you come." My aunt added, "You've always been the outsider. Don't make this about you." I didn't respond. I just reached into my bag, took out the backup USB, and walked straight toward the DJ booth. 10 minutes later, the music stopped, and so did every conversation in the room. I, 32M, stood at the entrance of the reception hall, watching my cousin's wedding guests find their seats while I held my invitation like a worthless piece of paper. The elegant venue buzzed with laughter and conversation, but something felt wrong the moment I walked in. I scanned the beautifully decorated tables, each adorned with white linens and gold centerpieces. Table assignments were displayed on an ornate board near the entrance, but my name wasn't there. I checked twice, then 3 times, feeling heat creep up my neck as other guests brushed past me to claim their spots. The family table sat prominently near the front, draped with extra flowers and reserved signs. My parents, aunt, uncle, and various relatives were already settling in, but there was no chair for me. Not even a folding chair pushed awkwardly to the side. I approached my mother, who was adjusting her dress and chatting with my aunt about the ceremony. When I tapped her shoulder and asked about my seating arrangement, she didn't even lower her voice when she responded that I was lucky they even let me come. The words hit like a slap. Several nearby guests turned to stare, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. My aunt, never one to miss an opportunity to pile on, added that I'd always been the outsider and shouldn't make this about me. I felt every eye in the vicinity watching this public humiliation unfold. My hands trembled slightly as I processed what was happening. This wasn't an oversight or a mistake by the wedding planner. This was deliberate. The backstory rushed through my mind in that moment. 3 years ago, I discovered something that changed everything about my family dynamic. While helping my dying grandfather organize his papers, I'd found documents that revealed the truth about my parentage. My father wasn't my biological father, and my mother had been lying to everyone for over 3 decades. When I confronted her privately, she begged me to keep it secret. She claimed it would destroy the family if anyone found out. I'd agreed, thinking I was doing the right thing by protecting everyone involved. But keeping that secret had slowly eaten away at me, especially as I watched my supposed father treat me differently over the years, as if he'd always suspected something was off. 6 months ago, during a family dinner, the tension finally boiled over. My aunt had made another snide comment about how I didn't look anything like my father's side of the family. Something in me snapped, and I'd asked her to explain what she meant by that. The conversation escalated quickly, with accusations flying about my character, my career choices, and my general worthiness as a family member. That's when I realized the truth. They all knew. They'd all known for years, and I'd been the only one pretending everything was normal. The secret I'd been carrying to protect them had already been out in the open, and they'd been using it as ammunition against me behind my back. Standing there at the wedding reception, watching my mother publicly dismiss me while my aunt twisted the knife deeper, I understood that this seating arrangement wasn't about space limitations or wedding logistics. This was their final statement about where I belonged in this family. I didn't argue or make a scene. Instead, I simply nodded and walked away from their table. But I didn't leave the venue. I had something else in mind. 3 weeks earlier, while helping my cousin with some technical issues on his computer, I discovered something interesting. He'd been having an affair with his ex-girlfriend right up until 2 days before the wedding. Not just a casual fling, but a full-blown emotional and physical relationship that had been going on for 8 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, photos, hotel receipts, and even a video call recording where they discussed meeting up after the honeymoon. My cousin had accidentally backed up his phone to his laptop, and everything was right there in his photo library and message history. At first, I'd been torn about what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to tell his bride-to-be, but another part of me didn't want to be responsible for destroying their wedding. I'd ultimately decided to stay out of it, figuring it wasn't my place to interfere in their relationship. But now, standing in this reception hall after being publicly humiliated and excluded from my own family, I felt differently about the situation. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small USB drive. I'd created it as insurance, not really planning to use it, but keeping it just in case. The drive contained a carefully edited compilation of the most damning evidence from my cousin's phone. Screenshots of text messages, photos from their hotel meetings, and that particularly revealing video call. I walked calmly toward the DJ booth, my heart pounding, but my exterior completely composed. The DJ was a young guy, probably in his early 20s, who looked like he'd done dozens of these wedding gigs. He was busy organizing his playlist for the evening. I approached him with a friendly smile and explained that the groom had asked me to deliver a special surprise presentation for the bride. I told him it was a romantic slideshow that my cousin had been working on secretly, and he wanted it played right after the dinner service. The DJ seemed excited about being part of a romantic surprise. He eagerly accepted the USB drive and asked when exactly to play it. I suggested he wait for my signal, which would come when I gave him a thumbs up from across the room. I returned to the reception area and found an empty chair at a table near the back, occupied by some distant relatives who barely acknowledged my presence. Perfect. I had a clear view of both the family table and the large screens positioned around the room for the slideshow. Dinner service proceeded normally. The bride and groom looked radiant at the head table, cutting their cake and feeding each other small bites while the photographer captured every moment. My cousin seemed relaxed and happy, occasionally glancing around the room to wave at various guests. My mother and aunt continued their animated conversation at the family table, probably discussing how successfully they'd put me in my place. They hadn't even looked in my direction since our earlier interaction. As the dinner plates were being cleared away, I caught the DJ's attention and gave him the signal. He nodded enthusiastically and started making announcements about a special surprise presentation from the groom to his beautiful bride. The room gradually quieted as the screens flickered to life. Guests turned their attention to what they expected would be a romantic montage of the couple's relationship. Instead, the first image that appeared was a screenshot of a text message thread. My cousin's name was clearly visible at the top, along with his ex-girlfriend's name. The message was dated just 5 days before the wedding, and it contained explicit details about their physical relationship and plans to continue seeing each other after the honeymoon. A confused murmur started rippling through the crowd. Some guests squinted at the screens, trying to process what they were seeing. Others began pulling out their phones to take pictures. The slideshow continued with more screenshots, each one more damaging than the last. Hotel receipts showing regular meetings over the past 8 months. Photos of them together in intimate settings. Text messages discussing how much they missed each other and couldn't wait to be together again. The bride's face went through a series of expressions that I'll never forget. Confusion, recognition, horror, and finally, a rage so pure it seemed to radiate from her entire body. She stood up from her chair so abruptly that it fell backward. My cousin had gone completely pale and was frantically gesturing toward the DJ booth, trying to get the presentation stopped. But the damage was already done, and there was more coming. The final piece was the video call recording, audio included. The screens displayed my cousin and his ex-girlfriend in a very intimate conversation, discussing not just their physical relationship, but also their emotional connection. The ex-girlfriend explicitly asked if he was sure about going through with the wedding, and my cousin had responded that he loved her but needed to maintain appearances for his family's sake. The room had gone completely silent except for the audio from the video. Every guest was transfixed by the unfolding disaster. Some were recording with their phones, others were staring in shock, and a few were already gathering their belongings to leave. The bride finally found her voice and screamed at my cousin, demanding to know how long this had been going on. Her voice cracked with emotion as she asked if anything about their relationship had been real. My cousin tried to approach her, attempting to explain, but she backed away from him like he was toxic. Her father, a large man who owned a construction company, stood up from his seat with a look that suggested violence was a real possibility. The bride's mother started crying and asking loudly how they could have been so blind. The bride's younger sister began herding the smaller children out of the room, trying to shield them from the chaos. At the family table, my mother and aunt sat frozen in stunned silence. This was clearly not the kind of drama they'd expected from the evening. My mother kept looking around the room as if searching for someone to blame for this catastrophe. The bride pulled off her wedding ring and threw it at my cousin's feet. She announced to the entire room that the marriage was over before it had even begun, and that everyone could consider this reception the celebration of her freedom from a lying, cheating bastard. She stormed out of the hall, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a banner of righteous fury. Her bridesmaids quickly followed, along with most of her family members. The groom's side of the family sat in various states of shock and embarrassment. My cousin finally noticed me sitting calmly at my table in the back. Our eyes met across the room, and I could see the exact moment he realized who was responsible for his public downfall. His face contorted with rage, and he started pushing through the crowd of remaining guests to reach me. I stood up slowly, not making any attempt to flee or hide. When he finally reached my table, he demanded to know why I'd destroyed his wedding. His voice was hoarse with emotion and barely controlled fury. I looked him directly in the eyes and told him I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply revealed what was already true. I explained that I'd found the evidence weeks ago while helping him with his computer, and I'd originally planned to keep it to myself. Then I gestured toward the family table where our relatives sat watching this confrontation unfold. I told him that I'd learned tonight that family apparently means being treated like an outsider and publicly humiliated at important events. I said that if this was how family treated each other, then maybe it was time everyone knew exactly what kind of family they really were. My cousin's anger seemed to deflate slightly as he processed my words. He looked back at our relatives, then at the chaos around us, and seemed to realize that his own actions had created this situation. I hadn't forced him to cheat on his bride or lie to everyone who loved him. My mother had finally gotten up from the family table and was approaching us with my aunt close behind. She demanded to know if I was responsible for ruining the wedding. Her voice carried that same dismissive tone she'd used earlier when she'd told me I was lucky to even be invited. I confirmed that yes, I was responsible for making sure everyone knew the truth about what kind of man they'd been celebrating. I told her that if she was so concerned about family reputation and proper behavior, maybe she should have been more worried about her nephew's character than my seating arrangement. My aunt jumped in with her usual venom, saying I'd always been jealous and destructive, and this proved that I didn't deserve to be part of the family. She called me vindictive and said I'd shown my true colors. I listened to her rant without interruption, then asked her a simple question. I wanted to know if she thought it was more vindictive to expose a cheater or to cheat on someone who loved and trusted you. The question seemed to stump her for a moment. She looked around at the destroyed reception, the overturned chairs, the abandoned cake, and the remaining guests who were all staring at our family drama with a mixture of fascination and disgust. I continued by pointing out that they'd made it clear I wasn't really family anyway. I'd been treated like an outsider my entire life, excluded from important decisions, criticized constantly, and tonight, literally left without a seat at the family table. So maybe it was time I started acting like the outsider they'd always insisted I was. My mother tried to interrupt, claiming that the seating issue was just a mistake, but I cut her off. I told her we all knew it wasn't a mistake, and we all knew why they'd never fully accepted me as family. The secret she'd begged me to keep had never actually been a secret at all. The color drained from her face as she realized I was talking about my parentage. She glanced nervously at my aunt, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. I told them that I'd spent years protecting their secret and trying to earn my place in a family that had never wanted me. I'd kept quiet about things I should have spoken up about, and I'd accepted treatment I should have challenged, all in the name of family loyalty. But tonight had shown me exactly what that loyalty was worth. They'd publicly humiliated me at a family celebration, made it clear that I didn't belong, and then expected me to quietly accept that treatment without consequences. I explained that I was done being the family scapegoat and the keeper of everyone else's secrets. If they wanted to treat me like an outsider, then I'd embrace that role completely. My cousin, who had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding, suddenly looked at me with something approaching respect. He seemed to realize that we were both victims of this family's dysfunction, just in different ways. He told me he didn't blame me for what I'd done. He said he'd been living a lie and hurting people he cared about, and maybe it was better that everything was out in the open now. He apologized for the way the family had treated me over the years. His unexpected support seemed to catch our relatives off guard. They'd clearly expected him to be furious with me and to help them gang up on me for ruining his wedding. Instead, he was acknowledging that I'd been treated unfairly and that his own behavior had been the real problem. This shift in dynamics left my mother and aunt scrambling to regain control of the narrative. My aunt tried to argue that family problems should be handled privately, not aired in public like this. She said what I'd done was vindictive and unnecessary, regardless of how they'd treated me. I pointed out the irony in her suddenly caring about privacy when she'd just spent the evening publicly humiliating me in front of the entire extended family. I asked her why my public humiliation was acceptable, but my cousin's wasn't. The remaining wedding guests were starting to leave, having witnessed enough family drama for one evening. The venue staff began cleaning up the mess, probably eager to get this disaster of a reception over with. As I watched the cleanup begin, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's secrets or trying to manage their expectations. I'd finally stopped protecting people who had never protected me. My mother made one last attempt to salvage the situation by suggesting we all go somewhere private to discuss this like adults. She said families needed to stick together and work through their problems without involving outsiders. I told her that ship had sailed when she decided to announce to a room full of people that I was lucky to even be invited to family events. I said that when you treat someone like they don't belong, you can't be surprised when they stop caring about your definition of family loyalty. I gathered my belongings and headed toward the exit, leaving my relatives standing amid the wreckage of what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. As I reached the door, my cousin called out to me one more time. He thanked me for showing him who he really was and what he needed to change about himself. He said he hoped we could rebuild some kind of relationship once he figured out how to be a better person. I told him I'd be open to that conversation when he was ready to have it honestly. Update 1. 3 days after the wedding disaster, I received a text from the bride thanking me for saving her from what would have been a disastrous marriage. She said she'd hired a private investigator after our conversation and discovered even more evidence of my cousin's infidelity. She was grateful she'd found out before legally binding herself to someone who clearly didn't respect her. Update 2. My cousin called me a week later. He'd ended his relationship with his ex-girlfriend and was seeking therapy to understand why he'd been living such a dishonest life. He apologized for the years of watching our family exclude me and never speaking up. We agreed to meet for coffee once he'd made more progress with his therapist. Update 3. 2 months later, my mother finally called. She admitted that they'd all known about my parentage for years and had used it as an excuse to treat me as less than family. She said watching me walk away from the wedding had made her realize how much damage their behavior had caused. She asked if we could start over with honesty this time. I told her I was willing to try, but that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort from everyone involved. The conversation was difficult, but it felt like the beginning of something more genuine than what we'd had before. Sometimes the truth destroys everything, but sometimes that destruction is necessary to build something better.